Good morning, everyone, and welcome to GPA Trading Services live trading class on this Tuesday, February 16th, 2016. Great to see all of our live participants with us this morning, so please you can join us. We hope you all had a lovely weekend and a very happy Valentine's Day on Sunday. And speaking of which, I wanted to share a couple of photos with you guys. In honor of Valentine's Day, I found this adorable card. You open up the inside of the card and there you go. It looks exactly like our beautiful fancy girl when she was a puppy. So I surprised Gary with that. I was so charmed and thrilled when I found this card. I was like, oh my gosh, it's our big fancy girl. So cute. Looks just like fancy girl when she was a younger puppy. And then next up, brace yourself, this is the adorable chocolate man that I gave to Gary. It says the perfect man, exclamation point. And it says just the way a man should be, sweet and decadently rich. And that makes me think of Gary. And this is a fine specimen of a man in his cute heart boxer shorts, and Gary actually has a pair like that say I love you with hearts all over that I gave Gary one year for Valentine's Day. So when I saw this, I said this is perfect for Gary, and it's actually rich chocolate that you can eat, but we have just saved it and it's still intact. We were just admiring how cute it was. We may get around to eating it one day. So anyway, I hope y'all had fun and a happy Valentine's Day and are now all geared up for this week's classes. And I hope you're having lovely weather. I hear it's supposed to be terribly cold in some parts of the country, but we have had gorgeous spring-like weather, just beautiful 70s degrees, up in the 70s, just warm and lovely and sunny. I had a beautiful sunset yesterday. I took some pictures of that. I might be able to share with y'all this week.
In the 80s later this
and Gary's saying it's projected to be up in the 80s later this week. So appears spring has sprung. I heard that we were going to have a early spring this year, and it's already here. We did not have any snow this year. It has snowed every year since we moved to Texas, and we've shared many a snow picture with you guys. But we didn't have any snow this year, and we have not missed it because it's pretty first day or two, but then when it starts to melt, it gets very messy, and when you have dogs that need to go outside, it gets rather tedious trying to keep them clean. So I've enjoyed no snow this year in this nice moderate winter we've had. All right, so I guess without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Gary and we'll begin. So, as always, please sit back, relax, and enjoy. And here's Gary. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, Gary's Market Forecaster GMF. It's the heads up on what's going down in the markets. But first, we have very specific rules of engagement. Those include the following. Do not trade with money you cannot afford to lose. Always trade with protective stops. Make certain the 4-hour, the 1-hour, the 30 minutes, and the 15-minute time frames align prior to trading with the new MPA PE3 software. Also adhere to very strict money management rules, which include never risking more than 2% of your entire account balance on any one given trade. For options friends, never risk more than 5% of your entire account balance on any one given options trade. And finally, all information provided by GPA Trading Services is for your educational purposes. So please give me a moment as I open up the charts. All right, good to see everyone this morning. We'll pick up with the euro. The euro, from our explanation last week, we believe that as we climbed higher a couple of times, we were due for a daily retracement. And in the last few days, we've had some nice movement toward the downside, which I was able to short the euro here for the last few days. And as the question now remains, is this part of the 2 going down in 3? or is this the C going down in D? And how far are we going to move is the question. Well, it depends on which one of these is playing out. If it is the 2 complete going down in 3, then we're going to expect we'll ultimately make a new low below this 105.19. Or if it's the C going down to this D, we should see a little 3-wave move in A, B, C, and projected to move towards the 107, 106 range before it's over. But it depends again on what type of correction is unfolding and which one of these wave counts is truly unfolding. So let's go to the software and analyze why we believe the euro is due for a further downside. As we see, the 4-hour did move from overbought territory, finally moving all the way to oversold. The daily did in fact give us what we were looking for. Not only did the PAI turn and hook down, but the trend momentum has crossed down to the downside as well. So Al, we have a trend momentum and a PAI down. That means we're expecting the euro to move lower. Only way we're going to see the euro start to really move higher, breaking new highs perchance, would be for a daily slingshot up. But it's early stages of this PAI and trend momentum moving lower, and currently the weekly is still up. So is this going to be one of these moves where the daily does in fact continue from overbought territory and moves all the way to oversold, very similar to what our 4-hour has done over the last few days? Or is this going to move and try to slingshot up? Well, the key is going to be as this does continue to move from overbought toward oversold, will it continue day after day after day after day? So we're going to keep this simple as we always do, and we state that as long as my trend momentum and PAI are down on the daily, we're going to expect the euro will move lower. Well, why are we starting to see a little bit of a bounce this morning? Because the 4-hour is bottoming, starting to turn up. So my line of progression would tell us, based on a daily trend momentum and PAI headed down, Andres, we should be looking forward to selling a 4-hour slingshot. The 4-hour traveled from overbought toward oversold, never really truly engaged upward. It tried to turn and bend a little bit, but never really managed to pull off a true 4-hour slingshot engaging up. But even if it would have, we would have expected it to fail. When I have a daily trend momentum and PAI down, should the 4-hour try to slingshot up, we would expect it to fail. As opposed to previously, the last few days of last week's classes, we noticed the 4-hour went from oversold all the way to overbought. It did try to slingshot lower, failed, turned into a slingshot higher, and then higher, and then higher again. Well, that's because on the left side of this equation, when we were slingshotting higher and higher, the daily was moving from oversold towards overbought and was still pointing upwards. Since this top in reversal we were anxious and expecting, we saw that the daily did in fact not only the 4-hour move from overbought territory down toward oversold, but it moved into oversold territory, which took several days to accomplish. And as it moved from overbought down into oversold, it did what we expected it would do, meaning we thought it would not only turn the PAI down on the daily, but would force the trend momentum to cross down on the daily. So, based on a daily trend momentum and PAI headed down, your trade alert is to sell this 4-hour slingshot. Well, the euro is grinding in a sideways to upwards correction as the 15, the 30, the 1-hour, and the 4-hour get their opportunity to move back towards overbought territory. And it gives, as the workforce, 15, 30, and 1-hour, workforce moves from oversold towards overbought. It's allowing this 4-hour to depressurize to form that slingshot back down. So based on a daily trend momentum and PAI headed down, we're going to expect the next line of progression would be to sell this 4-hour slingshot. Well, Gary, when exactly is that 4-hour slingshot going to be ready to sell? Once my 15, 30, and 1 hour grind and grunt their way into overbought territory. You'll notice what the 1 hour has been doing for its behavior. It started off slingshotting lower, it turned into a slingshot back up, then slingshot back down, and it's basically engaging, disengaging, engaging, disengaging. So Andres, I still expect the euro to drift sideways to higher in a chopping, overlapping, sideways to higher correction as my 15, 30, and 1 hour manage to move into overbought territory. So it's not unlikely to see this grind higher as it's tried, went to the 1190, pulled back, went to a range bound, and it's, as you notice, giving us higher lows and higher highs, slowly but surely from a low, a high, a higher low, a higher high, another higher low, working on perhaps another higher high. All that is action of my workforce moving from oversold, engaging, disengaging, engaging, disengaging, and working its way towards overbought territory. Well, James Brown, this is exactly what we expect. Joel Roos, this is exactly what we expect when we have a 4-hour bottoming and reversing. And as long as the 4 hours pushing higher, starting to depressurize, that is the behavior you would expect the lower time frames to exhibit. And once they manage to get into overbought territory, based on the sandwich between the 15, 30, and 1 hour being in overbought territory, a 4 hour in oversold territory depressurizing against a daily pushing lower on the trend momentum in the PAI, that sets up beautifully for a 4-hour slingshot. So your trade alert will be to sell the 4-hour slingshot on the euro, expecting that this downward pressure over the last few days is going to continue. And we will continue to expect the daily to move lower and lower and lower for as long as the trend momentum and the PAI, trend momentum, PAI, stay pointing down on this daily time frame. Pretty simple. So stair-stepping approach as the daily depressurizes. Yes, we went from overbought all the way to oversold on the 15, the 30, the 1 hour, and the 4 hour. The daily has managed, as expected, to not only turn the PAI down, but to follow through with conviction, having the trend momentum cross to the downside. So as we can clearly see, not only did Aquaman move from above the yellow line to below, but we have green crossing below the red line on trend momentum 1. Trend momentum 2 is pinching off. It hasn't quite crossed yet, but we still are in overbought territory. Notice where trend momentum 1 and 2 are located. So if the euro is in this 2 going down in 3, then I absolutely expect the PAI to move all the way to oversold and the trend momentum to continue its journey from overbought all the way into oversold territory. Only one way to find out if that's going to happen is to take one day at a time, one trade at a time. But again, our rule is simple. We follow the cycling time frames and we look for those specific signs and symptoms. And our signs and symptoms have been prevalent throughout this cycle as my 4 hour went from overbought all the way to oversold territory. And during that overbought to oversold, the 1 hour did what we expected it to do. From its bottom reversal, it tried to slingshot lower, failed, it disengaged, went on to make a new higher high. So we had a low, a high, a higher low, a higher high. It tried to slingshot down again, failed, and it's disengaging, and we should expect this little climb, chopping, overlapping sideways to higher to continue so this 1 hour could continue its journey into overbought territory. And once I have my 15, 30, and 1 hour in overbought territory and it starts to turn back down and move from overbought towards oversold, that's when I'm going to expect this 4 hour that's forming beautifully to turn into a slingshot lower. And based on a daily trend momentum and PAI down, I would expect that this correction should be short-lived, and then once it engages on the 4-hour, it should continue down with the daily, forcing the euro to go on and continue to make lower highs and lower lows. And this is part of that correction, even though in the lower time frames we see lows, highs, higher lows, higher highs during the correction. But once the 4-hour engages back down in the direction of the daily trend momentum and PAI down, we're going to make another lower low as we continue to stair step our way down. Okay, so as we're watching this scenario unfold, this is clear signs and symptoms we talk about each and every day. The time frame cycle, they exhibit very specific signs and symptoms. So where should this absolutely move? Well, we're expecting, based on the 4-hour continuing to depressurize, it would not be unheard of for this to grind sideways to higher and make a run back towards 1200, meaning 1.12. We did make a run towards that area, pulled back as the time frame cycled back down on the lower time frame, but the 1 hour's engaging, disengaging, engaging, disengaging, and that process allows this 4-hour to depressurize further to form that slingshot in order to sell it. So I'm going to keep an eye on this 1530 1-hour cycling up and down, and ultimately expect the 1 hour is headed for overbought territory as we chop up and down, chop, 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 sideways to higher, as these time frames move into overbought territory. That process, as I mentioned, of engaging, disengaging, engaging, disengaging, giving us lows, highs, higher lows, higher highs, higher lows, working on perhaps another higher high as the 1 hour finishes that cycle. That's also allowing this 4-hour to depressurize into a big, beautiful slingshot. So again, if you joined us late, the recommendation, William Thompson, is to sell, William Bruce, sell that 4-hour slingshot in the coming hours, as we would expect this correction, once it's over, should resume into the downtrend, following the direction of our daily trend momentum and PAI. And so far during this 4-hour depressurization, my trend momentum is starting to cross up, as evidenced by what? The Aquaman moving from below the yellow line to above. And you could barely see right there, the green is starting to cross above the red. That's good. And our PAI is starting to turn up as the red is moving higher, separating from green and blue here, which is the definition of a formation of a slingshot, when we have the red and/or red and blue race off and separate from green money flow. So that's exactly what is unfolding as we speak. And during this depressurization mode, it's allowing for the daily at this point, during this process of depressurization over the last multiple 4-hour time frames, as evidenced by these 4-hour candles, our daily is not showing signs of turning, hooking, flattening, or showing any reaction to the 4-hour depressurizing. So Al, when I see a 4-hour depressurizing against a daily headed lower trend momentum and PAI, and it's not reacting to that depressurization, that bodes well for the 4-hour to then slingshot to a lower low and continue in the direction of the daily trend momentum and PAI. Now again, it's early in the daily crossing over, as we're still located in overbought territory. It will take days, James Brown, for this to move lower, lower, and lower, and lower. Well, by then, days and days and days from now, perhaps this weekly does turn over and start heading down. And this would be what we would expect in the longer term, especially if we're going to have our larger degree wave count, 2 going down in 3, then we're going to require the daily to move from overbought to oversold. We're going to require the weekly to turn down and start moving lower, because it's going to need more than just the daily moving down to pull price all the way down, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pips, to go on and break this 105.19. And the difference between 2 going down in 3 and C going down in D would be that we must see a lower low over here to the right if it is this wave 3 blue headed lower. If it's not and it's C going down in D, then it's still likely to see the daily move from overbought to oversold, and perhaps the weekly does start to engage down and move a little lower, and then once the D is over, perhaps it disengages and releases and rallies back up. Well, in the interim, I don't care which one of these is going to play out, because as we talked about last week, we said as long as my daily trend momentum in PAI were either flat to up, we would look to buy 4-hour slingshots. And as the 4-hour went in overbought territory, it did exactly that. It slingshotted higher. The next day in class, we had the exact duplication of that process. The 4-hour depressurized to slingshot higher, and we got higher highs and higher highs. But as I was telling you, watching that process, I said, hey, we definitely are overdue for a daily depressurization to the downside, whether it's 2 going down in 3 or C going down in D, or whether this 2 or C complex is still unfolding, we still need some depressurization. So that's why each time I have a cycle, I look for those signs and symptoms. And as long as I don't trade, or I wait and trade when my foreman and workforce have agreement, that's when I can get to break even +1 and beyond, and perhaps allow those winning trades to run for several days. The euro dropped about 100 pips yesterday. It's dropping the day before, and it's dropped nicely since its high so far of 113.74. We got a low so far of 111.26. So we've moved over 200 plus pips during this down move thus far, and I think it still has much further to go. Now the question will be, if this is my C going down in D, then we would expect all of these moves to be in 3 waves. When this move up was the A, we had a combination correction in all this, but it's part of a 3-wave move, and an A, a B, a C, giving us our B wave down, then another big wedge, etc., but it ended up in an A, a B, and a C, giving us potentially the C wave. So we would expect on the D wave down, we would look for similar A, B, C. Everybody good? A, B, C. So the question is, this looks impulsive so far. So if this is part of that A wave, I think it's still unfolding, and we're probably going to make a run towards this 109.50/108.50 to potentially reach our A wave, as this is probably a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scenario giving us A, a little 3-wave correction up here for B, and then another big strong move down for C to give us this potential wave D. So I have 2 target zones. The first is for the A wave, then another B up, and then a C down for the second target around 107, 106. So what is that saying? Well, if this is C going down in D, it should take several days to a few weeks, as these have taken several days to a few weeks for A, a long multiple weeks for a B, several weeks for a C, so there's no reason to believe this D won't take several weeks as well. Everybody good so far? So part of this little up move today, I think, is just short-term correction, lower scale correction of a foreman and workforce depressurization against the daily trend momentum in PAI down. So yes, I expect to see a little more chopping, overlapping sideways to upwards move until that foreman is able to slingshot lower, and the foreman 4 hours waiting for the 15:30 and 1 hour to finish its cycle into overbought territory. So that's based on the line of progression and the cycling time frame signs and symptoms. Your trade alert, joining us late, is to sell the 4-hour slingshot down in the direction of the daily PAI and trend momentum down. And I expect this little stair step to continue, marching towards 109.50/108.50. at which point we'll probably get a few days of a correction toward the upside. Perhaps it's my daily engaging up, or perhaps it's the daily bottoming and reversing up. We'll see as time frames unfold and cycle how it ends up playing out, but that's what I'm looking for. A down move for A, an up move for B, a down move for C, even if it is this wave D. Well, Gary, what if it's the 2 ending and we're working on 3? Then similar, we're going to get a stair-stepping approach, but ultimately it should end up with lower highs and lower lows, and combined with the big difference, a new low below 105.19. Everybody good? So the difference in these big 3 and say D and 3 here is that 3 is absolutely expected to make a new low below 105.19. Where if it's D then E, we shouldn't break 105.19 until wave 4 or this B complex over here is over and we start moving way down to complete this. Well, the difference between the two is one believes this B is already done and we're in the early stages of a move lower in C. The other wave count says, no, this is part of a larger wedge correction. That wave B is not even complete yet. It's still unfolding. Then we're going to start that long, strong push lower. So what I want you to take home is long term, we're expecting the euro to go much, much, much lower. Whether it's 3, 4, 5 scenario and where B is already done, or if this wedge formation and B is not done, we still should have much further downside to go. And again, we'll just play it by cycling time frames. So yes, the weekly is currently up. That was part of this long-term correction. But I believe once the daily does move from overbought to oversold, it will force this weekly to turn with it. So right now, Gary, is it possible that we could see the 1 hour slingshot back up and make a new high over here? Well, it's possible this 2 or C is not done and we could go further, because notice the euro could go into the 114 handle. It could go as high as what? 117, but no higher. So back to the structure. I can't guarantee that this 2 is done headed lower in 3 or the C is done headed lower in D, but it really doesn't matter, because we should be selling rallies in a downtrend while the daily trend momentum and PAI are down. The question is, if it continues to move from overbought to oversold on that daily and the weekly does turn down, then it really sets the tone that this is more than likely, one of these is likely complete, and we are in the early stages of D down or 3 down. Well, it's also possible that what if the daily just slingshots back up and we make another higher high over here? Well, if we go on to make another higher high over here, then our 113.74, then obviously this complex of 2 or C is not complete. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in another red line for us. Remember what we can do? We click on the line till we see the little box. Once we do, we hold the control key down, left key click and drag, and it creates a duplicate. So I'm going to lay that right on top of this 113.74. Let me get the exact number. 113.74 and 1/10. So 113.74, 1. So this is an area of interest. Why is it of interest? Because if this 2 is done and we're moving lower in 3, or the C is done, we're moving lower than D. All right, so finishing up on the euro, as expected, this chopping overlapping should continue until the 4 hour engages down. We should expect a new lower low as we ultimately move towards our target zone of 109.50/108.50. And that would represent our A wave, then a B wave, and a C wave. Ultimately, I'm expecting a deep, more substantial retracement in this either D down or 3 down. Again, if you joined us late, the difference is the 3 wave should make a new low below 105.19, where the D wave should make a higher low, not a lower low. So your trade alert is to sell that 4 hour slingshot in the coming hours, expecting we're going to continue to stair step over the next several days toward this 109.50/108.50, at which point we should get another correction and another push. But basically over the next week or so, we're going to look for an A, B, C to play out, whether it's D or 3. The difference again will be how far down it goes, and including breaking 105.19. If we do make a new low below 105.19, then that obviously sets the stage that that was 2 complete moving lower in 3. Let's move on to the pound. The pound is moving lower as well. The question still remains with the pound. Is in fact this little ABC 4 over, and we're stair-stepping lower, and our targets coming in play will be 140.36 followed by 136.44, or is this working on a combination correction that could be a way for completing over here to the right, and maybe this move down is part of that little W ABCX, and we move back up in Y. Well, what's the lesson learned here? Yes, we sell daily slingshots, and we expect, well, it's a monthly, sorry, let me go to my daily. My daily's still moving lower, so my daily trend momentum and PAI are turning down. The prognosis would be for further downside on the pound, and my weekly is starting to show a little sensitivity so far. The green started to flatten out, blue's changing angle, and red's changing angle. But is it enough of a move on the weekly as the daily is moving lower? Or is this going to turn from a slingshot down to a slingshot up, and it ends up being that combination correction? Make it simple. We don't care if this is 3 ABC4 and we're moving lower, or this is a W moving lower in X and moving back up in Y. As long as the daily trend momentum and PAI are headed down, we're going to expect the euro and the pound to continue down over the next several days. And of course, on your charts, I would recommend you put these targets 1.4036, and a second target number 2 at 1.3644. I do expect no matter what's happening, whether we turn into a W, X, and a Y to end this wave 4 over here, or it's already over, I do expect to see both of these targets, 140.36 achieved and 136.44 achieved, as we continue to move lower in the weeks and weeks to come. The daily, again, is still moving over. Engaged, disengaged, engaged, disengaged, engaged. And there's no guarantee to say that this won't turn into a slingshot back up. But if this daily, as far as the trend momentum, continues to move from overbought to oversold day after day after day after day after day, then I expect we will see the weekly turn over and engage down. So signs and symptom would lead us to the direction of, Gary, if this 4 is over, then we must make new lows. And that's part of our target here, showing we have target 1 at 140.36, still another 300 pips away, and our second target of 136.44, and we're talking in excess of an additional 400 pips, so we're talking about 3 to 700 pip range, and I know it's a big separation in these targets, but if 4 is done, we must start breaking new lows. Stair step, stair step, stair step. If this is not over, then that daily is going to either turn back into a slingshot up or reverse and turn back up, and the weekly will continue to push higher, allowing this to end up being a W, X, and a Y. And we'll call that a combination correction. So continue to take profits as you move lower, and as long as the daily trend momentum and PAI are down, then we continue to sell the rallies in a downtrend. But once the daily either engages up and that weekly remains pointing up, even though it's changed angle, it's still not engaging, then it could turn into a W, X, and a Y. So please keep an eye on this weekly as my daily depressurizes. And if this weekly doesn't ultimately engage down, overruling a trend momentum pointing up, then we're going to go with the fact that we expect the daily will then turn and grind back towards the upside, and we'll look for this to grind back towards this 146.60 range, and perhaps even a little higher if it is a W, an X, and a Y. So some critical levels to watch to the downside would be the former swing point low of this swing point here of 141.47. And then, of course, obviously the previous bottom reversal of 140.78. If we go on and take both of these out, then obviously our 4 is over. We're moving lower in 5. But if we don't and we end up with a higher low and grind back up towards the previous high over here, perhaps the 147 range, then we would expect that this is part of a combination correction. Well, William Bruce, I can have a strong opinion about what it's supposed to do based on the signs and symptoms of the cycling time frames. And even though the weekly is showing some sensitivity, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to force it to engage. And if it doesn't force the weekly to turn over and it continues to grind higher and the trend momentum is still up, then we have a very high probability this is going to bounce and go back up here. Up and until the daily changes direction, continue to look for the euro to move sideways to lower. And you have your targets down low. So everyone clear on the euro? We expect to sell the 4-hour slingshot. As far as the pound, yes, we've had some strong down day as evidenced by. I did a little breakout trade. And let's go to the account history on this one. Did a little breakout trade this morning, and it reached take profit 1, take profit 2, and take profit 3. As I went through this, it was on this time frame, as I went through the process of hitting take profit 1, 2, and 3, all due to a breakout. And I left the breakout towards the downside because I expected it still had further down to go because the daily was still in the process of moving lower. All right? Even though the weekly is up, the daily was still moving lower. So that's why when I watched this little breakout last night, I told the system not to take any long trade, only to take a short trade because my daily trend momentum had already crossed and my PAI was in the process of moving lower as well. Having disengaged and moved lower the previous day, it was still headed lower as we went into last night's London session. And lo and behold, it was an ideal trade based on the cycling time frames. So ladies and gentlemen, I do expect the euro and the pound to continue to move sideways to lower. The question will remain, is it enough to break out the previous lows? Or is this going to turn into my W, X, and Y in reverse? Well, James, there's no way. Andres, Joel Roos, there's no way we're going to go back up 400 pips back to the 146.65, 147 range without the daily trend momentum and PAI changing directions. It's just not going to happen. So what we need to do is, yes, if you're short, take profits, as I was doing on that other breakout trade. And yes, it's even moved a little lower since then. It could still go lower. We still have a ways to go before this swing point low. So it may be that this wave 4 is over and we're going to go breaking these out and head down to my target of 140.36, followed by stair-stepping it way down to 136.44. Or the weekly is not going to turn, it's going to stay up, and this daily will turn from a slingshot down to a slingshot up, forcing the trend momentum that's turning down to turn back up, and lo and behold, we do bounce and start heading back towards this upper quadrant. So please watch the cycling time frames and your signs and symptoms. Until then, if you're short on the pound, I would be taking some profits. It's already moved 129 pips for the day, so I would definitely be peeling off profits, because we're not expecting this, even if it is long-term going to go down that way, it needs to stair-step its way down. You add that to the fact that the 4 hours moving into oversold territory, the 1 hour is in oversold territory, the 30 is in oversold territory, the 15 is in oversold territory. So that's reason for you to be peeling off profits. All right? Everybody good so far? So peel off profits as we would expect, even if this is the 4 going down and we're going to break those lows and head toward 140 and then that 136. We're still going to stair step our way down, and we still need corrections as my foreman and workforce need to depressurize. And at that point, Al, James, Andres, Joel, it's very important, Bill W., we watch to see once that foreman and workforce starts to cycle back up, is it enough to force this PAI to go from down back to up? Or this slingshot down turn into a slingshot up? And that would be, hey, maybe that's my W, X, and Y if it is the case. So if the daily stays engaging down and the trend momentum moves from overbought all the way to oversold, then yes, I expect to see the weekly will follow suit by ultimately engaging over and heading down like it's done before. But if it doesn't and it stays resilient and says, no, this is part of my little correction process and I still need more time to depressurize, then we're going to look for that daily that's facing down to turn and engage back up, and the weekly continue to move higher on the PAI and the trend momentum. If that is the case, then I would expect price to stair step its way back up towards that 146.65/147 handle to then complete that correction, then start a fresh new downtrend to the downside. Okay? All right, let's move on to the S&P. S&P is bounced. I think this is part of another, as they call, dead cat bounce. As during this correction, we believe we would go on to make a new low. We did so, not by a whole lot, but it still made a lower low. And I believe this is part of, Andres, another little dead cat bounce, and we're going to end up going back further down because there is a slight and a very small and unlikely chance that perhaps that wave 4 is done and we're in a bullish market back to the upside, but that is so unlikely, I don't even know why I'm even mentioning it. It's so unlikely. But physically, because of this last little move, it could be the end of that 5-wave move, and it could be part of my A, B, C corrections over. Wave 4 is done, and we're moving higher. I don't think so. We got a long way to prove that that would be the case by invalidating multiple of these resistance levels on the way up, as well as a monthly trend momentum PAI headed down, turning up, a weekly trend momentum PAI headed down, turning up. We got a long way to go before we even attempt to think that's what's unfolding. I believe this is just part of another little dead cat bounce, and we're going to turn and move lower towards our 1730/1647 target and below. So let's go to the software to check out how the time frames are cycling and the signs and symptoms. Well, why did we have this bounce? Andres, do you remember what I told you last week? Everyone, you remember what I said last week? Whether or not this daily slingshot down makes a new low or not, when it disengages and turns up, that is a great opportunity to scalp to the upside. I said it on the S&P, I said it on the Russell, I said it on, and it goes for any symbol. Whenever you have a slingshot that's engaging, whether or not it makes new lows or not, fails or is successful, makes new lows or does not, when it turns and hooks out, that is a perfect opportunity for a scalp because it's what? My 1530, 1 hour, 4 hour turning up that forces the daily to turn and hook out and forces this correction. And notice what the S&P did for us. Went from a low of 103 to so far a high today of 1892. That's just under a 90-point move. 90 points, James Brown, that's enough to retire on 90 points. Those guys that trade E-minis, they can go to heaven on a point or two, they wouldn't know what to do with a 90-point move. That's part of these signs and symptoms. Signs and symptoms. So you can go back in the recording of last week when we talked about this daily moving down, and as we started to move lower, I said once we see this turn and hook out, that a good sign for you to go and scalp this to the upside, because it should be a nice hearty move, because the daily takes time to depressurize, turn, and hook out. And my strategy is to look to sell the next daily slingshot back down. Yes, because why? The weekly trend momentum and PAI are still down, combined with a monthly trend momentum and PAI down. So nothing about this, Andres, says that this is the end of the road and we're ready to go bullish to the upside. Well, structure-wise, it could be, but it's so low of a probability, it's almost non-existent. But I just wanted to call that to your attention, that it's possible that could be it, but there's no way that's the case, that 4 is over, we're moving to new highs again in 5, without the weekly turning trend momentum and PAI up, combined with the monthly trend momentum and PAI up. And nothing about the weekly or the monthly at this juncture says we're doing anything but going much, much, much lower. Everybody good? Monthly trend momentum PAI is screaming at us it's going lower. Weekly trend momentum in PAI, start of a new week, is still screaming at us. Angle and separation moving lower, trend momentum PAI moving lower, states that this little bounce is short-lived and is going to end up with lower lows. My daily is simply depressurizing, so the line of progression, weekly trend momentum PAI down, monthly trend momentum PAI down, daily trend momentum PAI up. That is screaming at us to sell the daily slingshot. Okay? So your trade alert for the euro was to sell the 4-hour. The pound, we're going to look for the finishing cycles, but I should be peeling off profits on the downside on the pound because we're due for another correction. If it's going to be the big one, WX going up in Y, then that daily is going to turn from a slingshot down to a slingshot up, and the trend momentum is going to cross back to the upside, and the pound will climb all the way back to 146.65 to 147. Otherwise, if the daily doesn't turn and hook out and turn back up, we're going to get another small correction, perhaps another opportunity to sell the 4-hour on the pound. And then, of course, as we go through the S&P, this bounce should be short-lived, and it's going to turn into another lower low as the daily turns over. So what can happen here? Well, my 4-hour's turning over. My daily is depressurizing. Andres, if my daily doesn't start to follow suit as the 4-hour depressurizes, then look to buy and scalp further that 4-hour slingshot to the upside. Was it possible this could be the end of that dead cat bounce and we're already starting to make lower highs and lower lows? Sure, but it's going to require the 4-hour to go from overbought all the way to oversold, overbought all the way to oversold, and it's going to require that daily to start to change angle, turn, and hook, and engage back down. Well, that's my sign and symptom. So, Gary, what do you expect the S&P to do? I expect the S&P is going to drift sideways to lower as the 15, 30, 1-hour, and 4-hour are depressurizing. Once my workforce bottoms and reverses, so I do expect to see a little more sideways to lower movement here, hint, 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 sideways to lower. And as my workforce bottoms and reverses, Al, James, is it going to be enough to force the 4-hour to slingshot up? If that's the case, then perhaps we got a little more something, something left in this little dead cat bounce, and my 4-hour slingshot's higher, allowing for the daily a little more time to depressurize further. But I don't expect this to go bang, zoom, going up to make new highs. I suspect we're going to see price honor our previous swing point here, and maybe we get another little higher high here, but ultimately I should end up with a lower high over to the right and a lower low to follow. So let's go back to our chart. Depends on different wave counts, where there's multiple possibilities due to this correction. One could be, well, what if this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's my wave 3 black, and we're working on a 4 black correction? Well, the bearish of the bearish, says that no, this is part of this 1 2 1 2 1 2 magenta, 1 2 green, and we're working on 1 2 orange, which means we expect price to stay below 1939.50 and ultimately make that lower high and go down in wave 3 of 3 of 3 of 3 of 3. Everybody good? So subdividing wave counts, if it is Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you, honey, then we will see price stay below 1939 at the moment because of this 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 scenario we've been seeing unfolding. Well, Gary, does that mean if it breaks 1939.50, then it's not Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you, honey? No, but it just states that our subdividing 1 2 1 2s, our 2 cannot go into the area of the previous wave 2. If we're continuing 1 2 black, 1 2 blue, 1 2 magenta, notice my wave 2 blue here was lower than my 2 black, and my 2 magenta was lower than my 2 blue, and my 2 green over here is lower than the 2 magenta, as my 2 orange should be lower than the 2 green. Everybody with me so far? Subdividing wave counts. So this should be a short-term, short-lived rally. And when do we expect the resumption of the downtrend? When that daily engages down. In the interim, maybe the 4-hour, we get a little sideways to lower, chop, 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 sideways, lower movement. 4-hour engages and we go a little bit higher, but I still would not expect a movement above 1939.50. Well, what if it is this 3 going up in 4? Or this 3 blue going up in 4? Then in both cases, we can break above 1939.50. We should not go breaking above 1998.50. All right? So it all depends on which one of these subdividing wave count plays out. But Al, the bias is we're going lower. Andres, the bias is we're going lower. James, the bias is we're going lower because, yes, it's possible this is over and we could go up here, but it's so unlikely without the weekly trend momentum PAI turning up, the monthly trend momentum PAI turning up, and breaking all of these resistance levels. No way, shape, or form is that. So I almost didn't want to put that on the chart, but due to the latest 5-wave move down and this correction of an ABC, it could be wave 4. I still think, as I said, over here, that could have been wave 4, and over there could have been wave 4. I talked about that. I said, nope, nope, no, and I keep saying no. I still don't think, even if it turns out to be wave 4 is still unfolding, the bullish of the bearish scenario, it's still got further to go. So, sell the daily slingshot. Watch as we move sideways to lower. My 15:30 1 hour, 4 hours moving down. And watch that closely because once it turns back up, it could force the 4-hour to engage and we rally back up to another higher high. But again, if it's part of my 1 2 black, 1 2 blue, 1 2 magenta, 1 2 green, 1 2 orange, then we're not allowed to break 1939.50. So put that on your chart. Expect it to stay below 1939.50, and then put price must stay below 1998.50. So if it turns out we do end up slingshotting higher, we break 1939.50, then obviously I can't have 1 2 1 2 1 2 green, 1 2 orange. It must be perhaps this wave 2 green is turning into a combination correction over here, and we're eligible to break 1939. Okay, so that's why I got 4s over here a couple of different times. Is 4 done here? Is it still completing? Is this part of 3 4 now? Is this 3 4 5 3 4 black? And all that may sound confusing when you first look at it. Well, you got so many labels on here. What does all that mean? It simply means we're expecting this to be another dead cat bounce, and we're going to end up with a lower low, and we're going to follow the line of progression no matter what, meaning we're going to watch the daily, and we're going to watch that 4-hour. As my daily stays up, the 4-hour starts to depressurize as it's doing now. If this daily doesn't flinch, ladies and gentlemen, start to turn, flatten out, hook, get ready to engage down, then we're going to expect the 4-hour will engage back up. And perhaps this is still part of that grinding process that we end up, and then we top and reverse when the 4-hour turns over again. And the next time the daily does engage down as it did previously and go on to make another new lower low. Bottom line is you want to sell the daily slingshot, whether it's today, tomorrow, the next day, doesn't matter when, sell it because of the direction of the weekly and the monthly trend momentum and PAIs is screaming to sell that daily slingshot. In the interim, if the daily PAI stays up, the 4-hour finishes its cycle and depressurizes when my 15:30 1-hour bottoms and reverses. Then look for this to engage and price to grind back up toward the previous high of 1892 and likely to run into the 1900 and above. But again, a level it should not cross. If this is part of that 1-2-1-2-1-2, then we should not cross 1939.50. which represents my previous swing point high here. Okay? Is it possible we could slingshot higher and then do it a few more times and the daily keeps going for several more days and we do break above 1939? Sure. Right? It could be part of this 3-4 going up here. It could go all the way up towards 1998.50. Or there's a wave count, which I really can't show because there's so many other ones, that this could be part of another one down here, and we're going all the way back up here to as low as, say, 2133, and we part of that process that we could come all the way back to 2074 if that's a 1-2 with a deep correction. Well, again, I'm not concerned about breaking 1939, much less 1998, much less 2074. Right, everyone? Because I have a weekly and a monthly trend momentum and PAI down. All I have right now is a daily depressurization. That's why your trade alert, again, is to sell that daily slingshot, whether it happens today, tomorrow, the next day, doesn't matter when, sell it. And if my weekly stays pointing down, then look for another lower low. And what happens when we take out 1800? We're going to look for 1730/1647. And I still can't tell you, diverge-wise, when is it going to diverge and tell us whether it's 4 or whether it's the big Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you. It won't diverge for quite some time. Both can play out identically the same. The difference would be ultimately this wave 4, if it is in a wave 4 correction, cannot go down below 1350. Well, Gary, 1350, good gracious, that's hundreds and hundreds of points. That's over 500 points lower. Yeah, it still could be a wave 4 correction up and until then. If it breaks below that, 500 plus points down, then it can't be a wave 4 correction. It must be the big Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you. In the interim, don't care whether it's 4 or 5 or the Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you. Don't care about the labeling. I simply follow the line of progression. And you ask, well, if you don't care, why do you use it? Because it gives me these make or break do not cross levels. And it helps decipher based on price action, price proving its intentions by whether or not it's able to break previous swing points it shouldn't, then it's a different type of correction. If it holds true and continues to make lower highs and lower lows, then it still bodes well for a wave 4 down. It still bodes well for my Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you. So any questions you have on the S&P, look for some chopping up and down. It's not going to go one direction. It never does. It chops up and down. Even on a big daily candle that moves several points, it moved, 90 points up here? During that 90-point move, it did what? It chops up and down and breathes. My daily turned and hooked out. That was part of the process. When it did so, you would look for a scalping opportunity to the upside. The question now is this over because the 4 hours turning over, or is it going to continue? That's why Joel is my 4 hours depressurizing, and I'm watching the 4 hour give me a beautiful slingshot formation back to the upside. I can buy that for a continued scalp. But even if the 4 hour does go on and slingshot to another higher high, because the daily refuses to turn over, so far so good, great. But I still think it's part of a dead cat bounce, and we're still very unlikely going to break 1939. The only way we can break that 1939 high and go higher would be what? For the daily to continue to move higher and higher, the 4-hour continue to slingshot higher and higher. That would be the only way. Well, Gary, what if it's that 1-2 you were talking about? We come way up here. Then it's going to require the daily continue to move in overbought territory and force the weekly PAI and trend momentum to turn up. No way is the S&P going to go rallying back towards 2074, 2133 or new highs without the weekly trend momentum PAI turning and the monthly trend momentum PAI turning. So if they don't turn, no way we're going up there. Amen? These guys, trend momentum PAI, do not turn up on a weekly, then no way, shape, or form are they going to turn up on a monthly. Cannot and will not happen. And if my weekly doesn't turn, my monthly doesn't turn, then we're not going up here in price. We may go a little grunt a few more pips or a few more points higher, but ultimately we're headed to new lower lows and dramatically lower lows as my monthly continues to move from overbought to oversold. As we've seen before, when the monthly moved from overbought to oversold, yeah, you can have a few months of a correction, but you end up with highs, lows, lower highs, lower lows, lower highs, lower lows, lower highs, lower lows, as it stair steps its way down. Well, this could be the beginning of Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you, honey, and I expect it to crumble along with market crash, probably more than one, as we head down over the next few years. I don't expect this to end up in the next 6 months or even the next year. I think it's going to take a few years. Even if it is Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you, honey, to come all the way back down to 665 and below, then it will take a few years to do so. All right? So part of this stair-stepping process and the corrections in the stair-stepping, again, I would expect it to take at least into 2017 before we could even attempt seeing price being that far down. But we could go on and break 1354 perhaps sometime this year. And if we do see that, then going into 2017, we would only expect it to decline even further, as we would expect a new low near the 665 and below. All right, so far so good. So from a monthly perspective, here's the big picture. Again, is it part of this wave 3 over moving down in 4? Or is it the bigger picture of an A, B going down in C with the market crash, part of our wave 2 correction? There's a bullish and a bearish from the super cycle highest degree. One says this wave 1 green is complete and we're moving down in the bearish scenario for a 2 correction down here. The bullish scenario says, no, part of that subdividing wave count, we still got another push higher to complete that wave 1, then it's going to give us this wave 2 down. Well, that's long-term, multi-years, multiple years. As far as this 3 going down in 4 and continuing higher, then that's part of my A, B, C. And no matter if this goes higher up to complete this complex or it's already complete here and working its way down, we're still going to be an A, B, C coming down here no matter what. So even if it turns bullish again, we're still going to expect a big move down. And if this is the end of the road of B and we're already moving down in C, then we're going to see price break below that 1350 area. This is what separates 4 from wave C down here. We break below this 1354. Everybody good? So Gary, what is the prognosis? Sell the daily slingshot down. Well, if it doesn't slingshot down the next day or so, then look for the 4-hour to slingshot back up and look for this little dead cat bounce to have a little more legs as we move, maybe perhaps a little higher, but I still under the impression I expect it not to break 1939. So please take in consideration when I put these levels on the chart, they are important. It doesn't mean if it breaks 1939, then it must be we're going up here. No. It just means part of these subdividing wave counts, it's a little bit different correction. Everybody good? Well, Gary, what if it breaks 1998.50 and goes up towards 2074? Then it's that 1-2 scenario continuing much higher in that realm. And that's certainly viable. That could be part of my 1 combination 2, and we come up higher here, but we should not under any circumstance cross 2074.50 no matter what. Well, I don't think we're going to cross it. I don't think we're going to cross 1998, and I'm very doubtful we would cross 1939. So James, look for the daily staying up, does not turn as my 4 hours depressurizing, then buy that slingshot up on the 4 hour for a scalp continuation, and price should make a run towards the previous high of 1892 and likely to go into the 1900 area, but not break 1939. I really don't think that's in jeopardy. And ultimately, the reason being that these bounces should be short-lived and tempered because of a monthly and a weekly trend momentum and PAI down. That's how I view these and how I'm able to take such advantage of these moves because of Andres. As you said the other day, you made over a 35-point move, the largest in your trading history, based on what we talked about cycling time frame. And this was a 92-point move on the S&P. Why? Because the daily turned and hooked out, and that was what I was telling everyone. Even if this makes a lower low, which it did by a fraction of a point, it still was a viable scalping opportunity because it represents my foreman workforce in a daily turning back to the upside. So when I got a foreman workforce in a daily, you're going to have several points. And that's what I mentioned to you last week. So hopefully you're able to take advantage of that. If not, my daily stays up, then buy. Let me change this up a little bit. We're going to buy that 4-hour slingshot. If my daily trend momentum, as far as the PAI, my trend momentum stays up, then buy the 4-hour slingshot in the coming hours for another scalp higher. Everybody see what I'm doing here? We can buy the 4-hour slingshot higher in the coming hours because if this depressurization is not enough to force the daily to turn and engage down, then it should allow this to engage back up, making a run back towards 1892 and above. So you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of a 20-plus point move just based on that engaging slingshot. All right? So everyone know your strategy. Buy the 4-hour slingshot up if this daily does not turn and bend. And if it does engage up and stays, the daily stays turning up, then look for price to rally back towards 1892 and above, just not go above 1939. At which point, my 4-hour will cycle back over in the next go-around. I suspect it will take the daily with it, and we end up with another high, low, lower, high, lower, low, lower, high, lower, low. Everybody good? We got a low, a high, a lower low. So we're starting that process all over between my highs, lows, lower highs, lower lows, lower highs, lower lows, lower highs, lower lows, lower highs, lower lows. So what's my 2 trade alerts? Buy the 4-hour slingshot if this daily doesn't turn. Then when the daily does engage tomorrow, the next day, whenever, you're going to sell it with the expectations we're making another low toward 1803 and below. All right, let's move on. Gold. There's gold in them there hills. Well, part of this bigger correction, as we talked about last week, it kept soaring and we reached our 2 targets, 1212, 1227, soared much higher to 1263. We were due for this bigger correction, and I suspect this down move is part of the A, and this little bounce is part of the B, and we're still going to go even lower part of the C, but this should be corrective in nature. That should last a few more days before then a resumption of the uptrend. Well, Gary, what if this is part of this A going up long term, and I suspect we're going to see further upside based on this movement higher? Remember, we wanted to see the daily trend momentum in PAI turn down before we would expect a more pronounced and more obvious reversal and a correction. What happened? Exactly that. My daily trend momentum in PAI turned, crossed over. We got a trend momentum in PAI down. In the last few days, it's dropped significantly from 1263 all the way to a low of 1190. Remember the zone I put on the chart was that 1174 range for that correction to come down to, and it went much higher, and it's still going to make its range back down here. So Gary, what are you expecting gold to do? Greg Toussaint and others? I suspect that we're in the midst of a wave 3 magenta complete, and we're working on a wave 4 magenta down. I'm going to look for price ultimately to go toward 1184/1174, and that's the reason I put the Fibo here. It's about a 38.2% retracement, sitting there around 1180, right dab in the middle of this target. 1184, 1174, 1180, right in the middle range for this correction to unfold. Well, based on this 1, 2, 3, 4, obviously we could go much lower, all the way down to 1063, right? That's my 1 here. My wave 4 is eligible to go much lower than a 38 to a 50, a 61, could come all the way down here to that swing point high. It's possible, but I probably, based on the weekly and the monthly and everybody still moving up, that we're likely to see it not go that deep. And also what we talked about is, Gary, you talked about the importance of the daily depressurizing. Is it enough to pull the weekly with it, or is the daily just going to slingshot and make some new highs? Well, the weekly is showing a little sensitivity, but it's not enough yet, right? My red's starting to hook, but blue is still up. Money flow is still up. So that would bode well for the daily to depressurize and the slingshot higher in the coming days, because my trend momentum and PAI are still, at this moment in time, up. And not only is the weekly trend momentum and PAI up, but the monthly trend momentum and PAI are up. So if this is the beginning of this long-term, probably few year correction to the upside, and I'm in the midst of my A done moving up in B, then we have a long way to go. A long way to go. So again, I'm not going to tell you, I guarantee that we're not coming down here. It's pay me now, pay me later scenario. So let's take a look at the monthly perspective that I have on this chart. This is the bullish monthly perspective where this A is done, and we're in the early stages of a probably even take a couple of years, at least a year plus into 2017 for this wave B up to play out, before then reverting back down to wave C down. Everybody see the bigger picture? If this A is over, we're moving up in B. This should take a year plus to move up here, then move down in this C wave. Well, depending on the type of correction, this should be a zigzag correction. 3 going down in 4 should be a zigzag correction, which means we're likely to see this as an expanded flat and ultimately move lower. So what could that mean? Gary, that means this B wave up here, Greg Toussaint, could go all the way and make a new high. A, B to a new high, then down in C. Everybody good? Well, before I say that this A wave is definitely complete here and it's still not unfolding over here to the right that we talked about for many months, I'm waiting to see the weekly turnover. And yes, it rallied very robustly to the upside and invalidated a few levels of interest, but part of this subdividing wave counts, it's possible that we just got a very robust move, and we're still going to come down here first to complete that A over to the right. So I won't say that it's impossible that this is off the table because we've robustly moved, and I'll just put this over here just as a reference point, that there's no way that this little bounce is anything but A going up in B. It could be a subdividing wave, kind of deep retracement, and we still come down here to complete that A. I'm waiting for what? The weekly to turn. And when the weekly does finally turn, ladies and gentlemen, all eyes are going to be on that monthly. When my weekly trend momentum in PAI turn to the downside, is it enough to force the monthly to engage? Yes or no? If the answer is no, and my weekly depressurizes and slingshots higher and higher in the months to come, then that definitely sets the tone for A is done, we're moving higher in B. But if A is not done and it's still unfolding and my weekly does what? My weekly turns over and moves from overbought to oversold, and it forces the monthly to turn over. And the next thing we know, we have a weekly trend momentum PAI down. We have a monthly trend momentum PAI down, like over and over and over as we kept going lower and lower and lower and lower. Then yes, it's still available to us. So in the interim, what are we expecting? Further upside. I have new targets to the upside, in fact, to help you with that prognosis. If this is part of A complete moving up in B, and again, part of this process is going to subdivide multiple times, that's why it should take well into 2017 and beyond to complete that B wave up, if that's what we're in. We still are now at a 1-2 blue moving up in 3, and I have a target for wave 3 blue up at 1339. So everyone take a moment. Put a line at 1339 for wave 3 blue. Part of this wave 4 magenta, as we move up to finish this complex to complete our wave 3, is a projected target of 1339. But I don't think this little bounce here is over for that correction. James? I don't think this last 3+ days of a down move is this correction over and we're going breaking new highs. I think it's part of a correction that's going to last longer and ultimately play out in a little ABC scenario before then going up here targeting my 1339. Okay, here we go. So let's finish up for today. I do believe this part of this little bounce on gold is not a resumption of the uptrend. I think it's going to be a little AB going down further in C. The key, again, as I was watching, is the daily is moving lower. So as long as Joel and others, the daily trend momentum and PAI are down, I'm expecting gold a stair-step lower, and likely that ABC scenario for wave 3 going down in 4 before resuming the uptrend. My weekly is still moving up, even though the red's hard to hook a little bit. The trend momentum and PAI are up. That's why we expect the daily will ultimately go on to slingshot higher in the coming days. But until then, we should see some more sideways to lower correction. And based on the structure thus far, this looks very impulsive to the downside, so this should be the beginning of the A portion of that move, and we have a B-C scenario that should play out over the next few days. And your trade alert on gold is to buy the daily slingshot higher, whether it engages tomorrow, the next day, Friday, next week. We want to look to buy the daily slingshot higher, and once the daily does engage up, the weekly remains up, we're going to shoot for not only 1263 be taken out, but a target, longer term target of 1339. And that would be part of my 1-2-3 blue, shooting for 1339. All right, so Gary, what do you believe we're in? We're in a 3 complete, moving down in 4 magenta. This initial down move is part of an A complex. We got a B and a C to make this in a 3-wave move, allowing the daily to depressurize before slingshotting higher. And the weekly, if the trend momentum PAI stay up on the weekly, then expect we will slingshot and continue climbing, breaking 1263, going up towards 1339. Other than that, I'm still going to wait and watch carefully once the daily turns over and the weekly turns over. So more importantly, that weekly turning over, not only the daily, but the weekly giving us a trend momentum and PAI down. At that point, all eyes will be on the monthly to say, okay, weekly, you're turning over, trend momentum PAI are headed down. is it going to be enough to force this monthly to turn over with it? If the answer is yes, then perhaps this A is not done, it's still unfolding. But until then, we're going to continue to buy the dips in the uptrend. We're going to look for more sideways to lower correction, waiting for the daily to engage up. And once the daily engages up in the direction of the monthly and the weekly trend momentum and PAIs, we're going to shoot for 1339. Well, Gary, how far should gold go down before the correction is over? I have this target of about a 38.2% retracement. A, B, C come down in this area, then reverse and go higher. Bottom line, you want to buy the daily slingshot up, shooting for 1263 and above, targeting 1339, based on the weekly trend momentum PAI up, monthly trend momentum PAI up, and a daily depressurizing to slingshot higher. Oil, in case this freezes up again. Oil prices, again, part of this correction, I think is part of a 1-2-1-2 subdividing wave count from last week, and I expect to see price stay below this 33.57. Maybe this latest rally towards this high of 31.45 is the end of the road, and we go smoking back to the downside, not only targeting out 26.10, but I have a new target range for black gold Texas T, the Beverly Hillbillies, down here at 1402, 1198, basically the $12 to $14 range, for this to subdivide further to complete this wave 2 bottom reversal, then look for some movement to the upside. So right now we have oil prices moving down today because my 4 hours topping and rolling. My daily was moving up. Is this 4-hour cycle similar to regular gold? Is black gold going to follow suit where the 4-hour depressurized but the daily says no? Then perhaps we do go a little higher and we sustain a little bit longer correction. Otherwise, if the 4-hour moves from overbought to oversold, the daily engages down, then we're going to shoot for our 2610 target again, then start to stair step down to 25, 24, 23, 21, 22, into the teens. And if this is correct of the subdividing wave count, ladies and gentlemen, then we should see part of this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 3 right here. And then we ultimately move down into this final complex. 4 black, 5 black, and we finish it. That's why our new target zone is $12 to $14. In the interim, could we see a little bit more time-consuming correction? Yes. In the interim, should we expect price to stay below 33.57? The answer is yes. Otherwise, this could be part of a combination A, B, C scenario, and we go breaking 33.57 and break 34.79. Then it's part of a combination correction. Then we're going to continue down. But no matter how we slice it, we're expecting further downside. I mentioned to everyone, target 2610, and we went to 2603. How's that for a target? And beautifully stated, and it went right to this zone before bouncing. Again, is this part of another 1-2-1-2, 3 of 3 down? If it is, then price will not go above 33.57. We'll go breaking 26.03, headed down, stair-stepping its way down. Once this plays out, I'll give you some interim targets. Big target, long-term target down here is around 12 to 14. That would end this move in a big reversal starting thereafter, but I don't think oil prices are finished based on this subdividing wave counts. Well, Gary, what if my daily, as we just mentioned, the subdividing and cycling timer, what if this daily doesn't turn over as the 4-hour depressurizes? Then, Al, I want you to buy that 4-hour slingshot to the upside. So just like we did on gold, we can put buy that 4-hour slingshot, and ultimately we want to sell the daily slingshot in the coming days, but in the interim we'll have an opportunity to buy a 4-hour slingshot. So if this is over, then we may not get a 4-hour slingshot, and this just continues to move from overbought to oversold, and the daily follows suit, and that correction is over, right? Part of this 1-2-1-2, and we're down in 3 of 3. Well, if it's not over and it's a more complex correction, then the daily will stay up, allowing us to allowing us to buy the 4-hour slingshot back up, and likely not only to engage and make a run at the previous high, but run even higher towards that 33.57. So is this part of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're going to go back up here to finish this thing? Or is this part of a longer term correction, that wave 4, and we're going to end up over here, and we come down in a WXY scenario? Follow the cycles. So your 2 trade alerts on black gold: if the daily doesn't turn as the 4-hour depressurized, then you buy the 4-hour slingshot back up. If the 4-hour never engages up, then you continue to let this ride down. The daily turns over, you scale into that position, expecting price to come back down to 26.03 and below. If, again, the daily says no and stays up, then look to buy the 4-hour slingshot back up, which should mean we're likely to rally back up toward this high and make a higher high. Whether it's an ABC4 done in 5 or this WXY scenario, it still would allow for this to rally back up toward the previous high and likely to make a higher high. All right, so any questions on black gold? Texas T, the Beverly Hillbillies. Again, big picture as we go through this process is part of this correction. 1, A, B, moving lower in C, wave 2. And since this B has been done, we have a 1, 2, 3, 4 subdividing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So that's why we expect this 14/12 zone to come into play. Longer term, question is this little bounce going to be a little more substantial, or is it going to be less substantial and continue to go lower and lower and lower? I go on record, as I said before, that my 26 target was not the low, but part of a low target. As I said, this low was not the end of a reversal. That low was not the end of a reversal. These lows are not the end of a reversal. I still see, based on the structure, much further downside to come, aka is designated by $12 to $14 bottom reversal target. So in the interim, while we're sitting at 28, did a 31 and a reversal from 31.45, or we're going to continue up a little bit more. Doesn't really matter. We still should come down further, so I will go on record again stating that this low here of 26.03 is not the end of the road, and we have further downside to go. And as I mentioned, once we go breaking below 26 and confirm resistance, I would talk about new targets, and now you have them, 12 to 14. Well, in the interim, if it is my 1, 2, 1, 2 on the daily chart I was showing you, then I'll give you some interim targets for 3 down here, 4, 5 for this 3, 4, 5 for that 3. But here's the bottom reversal down here, about $12 to $14. Any other questions? Quick review of the dollar index. It's moving higher, no surprise there. The 4-hour tried to engage, failed, is disengaging. That's no surprise at this behavior, right, James? Because the daily on the dollar index is still moving up. And as my 4-hour turned to depressurize, it engaged. Daily said no, it disengaged and moved higher. 4-hour tried to engage. The daily said no, it disengaged. Now the 4-hour topped and rolled and tried it one more time, and it's doing it again, right? Engage, disengage, engage, disengage, and it's turning back up. Money flow is still up. Dollar index is going higher. Euro and pound are going lower. Everybody good? Euro and pound are going to go lower as long as my dollar index continues higher. So I want to keep a keen eye on my daily trend momentum and PAI on the dollar index to see if this daily cycling up is enough to force the weekly to change, or is this daily simply going to depressurize to slingshot lower in the coming weeks. Right? So I want to keep an eye on the daily as it's cycling higher, and yes, we expect it will grind higher. As long as my trend momentum and PAI are up on a daily, the dollar index is projected to go higher. But is this process of crossing to the upside on the trend momentum going to move from oversold to overbought, PAI from oversold to overbought? then I would expect, if that is the case, this weekly will turn. If not, then we look for a daily slingshot lower, as we would look to buy the daily slingshot higher on the euro, sell the daily slingshot lower on the dollar index. If my weekly says no, then this correction is not over. If my weekly starts to turn and move back up, then this correction is over and we're going to start to make a run back towards 100 and above, which means the euro would start making a run back towards that 105, 104, 61, etc. Fair enough? And same thing with the pound. Long term, I expect the dollar index to go much higher. Long term, I expect the euro and the pound dollar to go much lower. And we play one cycle at a time, one day at a time, one trade at a time. And during our trade management, we get to breathe easy +1 and let the winning trades run, especially when signs and symptoms and cycles are telling us let it run. Don't be afraid to worry, well, I was up 100 pips, now I'm down to 50, that I should panic because it went against me a little bit. Part of those cycles, it's going to, and it's supposed to, and you should expect it. But as long as the higher time frames are saying stay in that trade, let it go. Well, what if you get pipped out? Well, if I get pipped out, my higher time frames are still selling, stay in there, then you just jump right back in and continue the journey. That's part of the signs and symptoms of the cycling time frames. Amen? Pretty simple. So anything y'all want to discuss, please type it in. Any symbol we haven't discussed you want to talk about? I believe we covered all of our normal symbols in great detail. I'll go ahead and shut this down here a second and close that down. And we can talk about the Russell. Russell 2000 is part of that same process on that daily. So let's look at the same thing we talked about, Andres. When the daily turned and hooked out, whether or not the Russell made a new lower low, we expected what? It would be a great scalping opportunity as it turned and hooked out. And sure enough, the Russell went from a low of 1936 up to a high so far of 1988. Roughly 50-point move. Not too shabby. And Gary, is it over? Same rules apply to the dollar S&P. My weekly is still down, trend momentum PAI. My monthly trend momentum and PAI are still down. So my daily depressurizing is and will be continue to look to sell the daily slingshot. Andres, today, tomorrow, the next day, whenever it engages, you want to sell it. Well, in the interim, during this little correction in the daily depressurization, is it enough as the 4 hours depressurizing to force the daily to engage down? Or is this simply not going to be enough and we end up slingshotting higher? So you know what's coming. I have 2 trade alerts on the Russell 2000. We want to buy the 4 hour slingshot. While the daily trend momentum and PAI are up. So as it depressurizes, if I get a 4 hour slingshot to engage up, at which point the daily trend momentum and PAI are still up, then I'm going to look for a higher high. I'm going to look for price to engage, make a run back at the previous high of 1988, and look for a higher high, perhaps the top of the cloud. Sitting here at 993, not 19, 993. Andres, you got that? So you want to buy the 4 hour slingshot. As long as my daily trend momentum and PAI, we're going to buy the 4 hour slingshot, targeting the previous high of 1988, targeting 983, targeting 993. So we're going to look to buy the 4 hour slingshot, shooting for the 988 previous high, and shooting for a new high of 993, basically the top of this cloud. And when do? I buy that 4 hour slingshot, especially considering the daily is still up. But in the coming days, as I separate this over a little bit, in the coming days, we want to sell the daily slingshot because my weekly trend momentum PAI and my monthly trend momentum PAI are down. So Joel, you see how things cycle up and down? You get into the groove, you get into the rhythm. Up, down, and as they cycle from oversold to overbought, overbought to oversold, back and forth, we look for the lower time frames and the higher time frames to exhibit those very specific behavior. And I will go down and say this again. I don't care when you have a daily slingshot engaging, making new lows, or failing to make new lows. When it turns and hooks out, that's a perfect time to scalp this. Because why scalp? This scalp is because it's a rally for another dead cat bounce to another lower low based on a monthly trend momentum PA down, a weekly trend momentum PA down. So a daily depressurizing against that weekly and monthly should mean it's going to slingshot to another lower low. And it's been doing that over and over and over. So no reason to believe it won't do it again. That's your trade alert down the road, which may be a few days from now. In the interim, if this daily does not turn as the 4-hour depressurized, then we buy the 4-hour slingshot. Because that's the rule. If my 4-hour turning over from overbought moving to oversold does not force the daily to engage, then the daily, non-engaging daily, I should say, the non-engaging daily is going to force the 4-hour to slingshot higher. Amen? So Andres, we should run back towards 988, break it, make a new high towards 993 as my daily continues to rally. And I don't care if we rally to 993 or above, whenever that daily turns over and engages, I'm selling. Okay? Daily sell, 4-hour buy. And in the interim, what can we see price do? Chop up and down, moving basically chop, 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 sideways direction. 4-hour slingshot, we should make a higher high if my daily does not turn over. Amen? Pretty simple. And it doesn't matter the symbol. Same. Any symbol, same cycling time frame, same signs and symptoms, same line of progression. GDX has been climbing, and it had a nice little nosedive because of this move lower. Why? Because gold went from that 1263 down to 1190? 1180, whatever it was. And I don't think it's finished. I think this is part of that correction even further before we continue higher. But I'm going to follow the line of progression. 4 hours turning over on GDX. My daily is still in the process of overbought territory, so GDX is due for further downside, just like gold is due for further downside. My weekly is moving into overbought territory. So again, once I get my weekly to turn over on gold, my weekly to turn on GDX, that's when we should get a big hearty retracement. I mean a very strong several dollar retracement. And if it turns out the weekly's depressurizing to slingshot higher because the monthly continues to move up, then we're going to buy this and look for price to continue to surge much, much higher in the coming months. Because if this is A, done on gold moving up in, B, and gold's going to go up hundreds of more dollars in the coming year, then GDX is going to go up several more dollars as gold continues to go up hundreds of dollars. All right? Keep an eye on this because I don't think this is, even if this is the end of the road, this isn't just going to keep going straight up. It's going to give us a big pullback when the weekly turns over. And once I get the weekly turning over, Al and others, James, I'm going to keep a keen eye on this monthly. Is it enough to force the monthly to turn or not? If the answer is no, as this pulls back, I'm going to then buy several shares of GDX, UGL, whatever one you want to use out there, GGN, depending on your risk for, appetite for risk.
Risk tolerance.
Risk tolerance, your threshold. But bottom line, if this A is done on gold, we're moving up in B over the next year plus. then these boys are going to go smoking way up here as well. And it's imperative we see what the monthly does when the weekly turns. Because there's no rule to say that we can't go breaking down to $10 once the weekly turns over the monthly engages and we make a new low below this 1238 and we make a move towards $10. So I can't say I guarantee this is the end of the road, but I'm going to watch my signs and symptoms. And John Young husband, once my weekly turns over, I get a weekly trend momentum PAI down. If that weekly pushing lower does not attempt or force the monthly to turn with it, then as soon as the weekly starts to finish its bottom reversal cycle and my daily bottoms, I'm going to look to buy this stock or buy the ETF or buy a play and look for this to go much higher in the following throughout 2016 into 2017. We need to see the signs and symptoms, and before we call it as a guarantee, we need to see the weekly turnover and the monthly say, nope, not happening, people. It's my turn to move from oversold to overbought. And the last time we did some of that oversold, overbought, it went up numerous dollars all the way into the 90 handle. And even after the big plummet, it went from oversold to overbought. And it went from this low area of about 30s all the way to the highs of 80s. So it more than doubled, almost tripled in price on that one. More than tripled here, almost tripled there, and look at where we are again, way down here again. So imagine where we can double, triple, quadruple as we move back up. So again, don't get carried away that, hey, my A is done, no questions asked, and we're going up here, woo! I'm going to wait for the weekly to do its cycle because this price will come way back down. Maybe it comes to this 14 range. Maybe it comes even a little bit lower. Or if the monthly does turn with it and I end up with a monthly trend momentum PA down, weekly trend momentum PA down, then we come all the way back to the low and even maybe $10. Then we can buy and start the process all over.
And we pounce.
And we pounce. I like it. We pounce. So, John, you got that? This is going to be a great play. It's not very expensive. GGN is even less expensive, under $5. And I still am not ready to sell out on this yet because I know my weekly is going to be turning over soon. Even if it rallies up a little bit, I'm still going to expect it to pull back no matter what when the weekly turns, and all eyes will be on the monthly. Do you follow or do you call it quits? And if you follow, then definitely good thing we're going to buy and start the process over when we come way down here. Otherwise, we'll probably make a run towards this 14 handle and buy there when the weekly starts engaging back up. My daily starts bottoming because my monthly refused to turn. Amen? All right. So if there's no other questions, John, you have any symbols you want me to look at? Any last requests before we call it a day? Any last requests before we call it a day?
John was trading the euro pound, I think.
Euro pound. You want me to take a quick look at that? Trish says do the euro pound.
I think that was John's trade, wasn't it?
That's one of interest, yes. And where's my euro pound? There it is, euro pound. I knew I had him in here. Okay, John, no surprise that we continually grinding higher. My monthly's turning up. My weekly is turning from oversold back towards overbought. It did a little dip here and it turned back up. So what's the prognosis? We look for another correction that's unfolding and the same rules apply. I have a weekly trend momentum and PAI up, right? Overbought, but still up. I have a monthly trend momentum and PAI clearly smoking to the upside. So this is not the end of the climb. It's going to go higher. I just need to allow for my daily to depressurize and look for an opportunity to buy a daily slingshot higher because my weekly is still up and my monthly's up. And yes, I do expect to see this swing point high over here of 78.95 to be taken out and a move continue higher towards these previous swing point highs over here in the 80 plus range 80. So we got 79 basically go to 80. That's another 100 pips to this area. And then once we break that, we're going to start heading, break this is about the same. It's probably about 80 and a half. Yep, 80.64. So we go from 80 to 81, and we start making a run up towards this previous cluster, previous support, turn resistance over here, and that puts us in the 84 range. So I'd not be at all surprised to see the Europine continue to grind higher in the coming months. My weekly has shown it's prone to do what the monthly's doing by slingshotting higher and higher so far. And my monthly hasn't shown any sensitivity to turning over. So once the weekly turns over again, John, which it will, the weekly's going to need to turn over again, I'm going to watch the monthly. If the monthly says, nope, still not interested, still going higher, not interested, then buy the weekly slingshot higher as we go towards 80 and then 81 and 84 ultimately. Headed probably towards the bottom of the cloud, right around that 83.75, 84 range. All right, monthly Ichimoku cloud, the bottom of the cloud range, depending on how long it takes to get over there, you turn around that 83, 84 range. That's certainly not out of the question, but we need to play the cycles. Play the cycles, buy the dips, play the cycles, buy the dips. And as my weekly turns over again, monthly says no, then buy your daily cycle back up, weekly turning and hooking out or engaging up, and we continue to go higher and higher and higher. But in the coming months, William Bruce, I'd not be surprised to see this sitting up here about 84. Longer term. So with that, good day, good luck. Well, let's do one more. William Bruce, how about the CAD? CAD's still in a nice, hearty retracement. I don't think this is over because I don't think the dollar index is over. So the dollar CAD is not over. So enjoy the correction while we have it, but longer term, we're expecting this to go much higher in the months to come. Yes, we're getting a little bit of a bounce today because of the Foreman cycle, but we still have the weekly starting to show some sensitivity, but it's not quite engaging up, and my monthly is also depressurizing. So I don't think this is the doom and gloom that the dollar CAD is going to go back to parity and below. I think this is just simply a small little correction, ABC correction. Then my monthly is going to turn when the weekly trend momentum and PAI turn, and my daily bottoms and reverses and turns, and we start having a daily trend momentum PAI up, weekly trend momentum PAI up. I'm going to expect the monthly to follow suit as it's done over and over and over and over, and I expect to see it again. And what does that mean long term? It means we're not only going to go soaring back up to the previous high of 46.88, basically right around 47, but we're going to make a run towards that 150. Any questions? So Gary, in the interim, what are we seeing? We're seeing a daily depressurizing, part of this correction. We're seeing a 4-hour depressurizing, part of this move higher. But I don't think this is the end of the correction and the CAD's going to go breaking new highs. I still think we got a little bit more sideways correction to unfold, and we need the weekly to turn and hook up. And when's the weekly going to turn and hook up? When the daily bottoms and reverses. And if my daily depressurization so far is not enough to force it, then perhaps we get another little chopping sideways movement. Then the daily turns. Trend momentum PAI up, weekly engaging, that's when you want to buy and look for another surge higher. In the interim, you can trade intraday looking at Foreman and workforce cycles. So in closing, I expect to see the dollar CAD chop, chop, chop sideways to higher while the Foreman and workforce cycle finishes. Then another push lower once the 4-hour Foreman workforce cycles back down. Look for the daily to start pushing back downward, meaning we're going to go back toward perhaps the bottom of the cloud, and then maybe even a little bit more. And then once the daily cycles back up, the weekly, once it engages, should be the end of the correction and start of a new trend to the upside. And once this is able to say, hey, I have a trend momentum and a PAI on the weekly up, that's when I'm going to expect the monthly will turn with it, and we're going to go blowing past 47, 48 and head to 150. So good day, good luck, God bless you, may the pips be with you. I'm humbled and honored to be your mentor and instructor.
We'll see you tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow, and always remember your rule. Don't trade without the foreman and the workforce. And as my foreman and workforce are in a buy or a sell cycle, I can always trade it, but it's imperative I know its surroundings. Be aware of your surrounding. My foreman and workforce is in a buy cycle, then if it's buying against a daily, weekly, monthly down, then we know the 4 hours should slingshot lower with the direction of daily, weekly, monthly. Well, what if I have a foreman and workforce in a daily cycle buy, and it's against a weekly and a monthly? Then we look to sell the daily slingshot lower, and vice versa. If my monthly, weekly, etc. are moving higher, and my daily is depressurizing against a weekly and a monthly moving up, then we look to buy the slingshot higher, part of that same cycle. All right, so take care. We'll see you tomorrow.